Hello everyone, I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin the first story. The highway stretched endlessly before Sarah as she gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles. At 19, she thought herself invincible, driving across the country alone during winter break. Her mother's worried voice echoed in her mind, but pride had won over prudence. Now, as her 20-year-old Honda Civic sputtered to a halt on a desolate stretch of Midwest highway, that pride felt like the coldest comfort imaginable. Snow began falling in thick, lazy flakes that caught in her headlight beams like ghostly moths. She tried the engine again. Nothing but a pathetic wheeze. The nearest town was an hour away according to her GPS, but her phone showed no signal bars. Only the emergency call button remained active, glowing like a tiny beacon of hope in the darkness. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the speaker, distant and tinny. An officer would arrive within the hour, she was told. Until then, Sarah was instructed to lock her doors, cover her windows, and make herself invisible. The dispatcher's tone carried an urgency that made Sarah's stomach clench with dread. This particular stretch of highway, she learned, had a reputation for targeting stranded drivers, especially young women traveling alone. Sarah rummaged through her camping supplies, finding sun shields that she pressed against every window. The car became a cocoon of artificial darkness, lit only by the pale glow of her phone screen. Outside, the wind howled across the empty plains, rattling her small car like a child's toy. 30 minutes passed in suffocating silence. Then came the feeling creeping up her spine like ice water. Someone was watching her. She told herself it was paranoia, that fear was playing tricks on her mind. But the sensation persisted, growing stronger with each passing moment. With trembling fingers, she turned her phone's screen toward the passenger window, using it like a mirror. In the small gap where the sun shield didn't quite reach, she saw it. A face pressed against the glass, pale and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to reflect her phone's light like an animal's. The man's lips were curved in a smile that spoke of madness and hunger. Sarah's scream tore through the confined space, a sound of pure terror that seemed to please the figure outside. His laughter followed, low and guttural, as he began circling her car like a predator. She heard him testing door handles, his fingers scraping against metal and glass with deliberate slowness. Her second call to 911 connected to a different dispatcher, one who accused her of prank calling. Despite her sobbing pleas, the line went dead, leaving Sarah truly alone with the monster outside. The third call reached a man who believed her terror, who promised help was only minutes away. But minutes felt like hours as the creature outside grew bolder. The sound of breaking glass shattered the night. Sarah watched in horror as a rock punched through her windshield, spiderwebbing the safety glass. The man climbed onto her hood, his wild eyes visible through the cracks as he began stomping downward with methodical precision. Each impact sent glass fragments raining into the car's interior. With nowhere left to hide, Sarah burst from the back door, her phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. The beam caught her attacker mid-crawl through the windshield, his body contorted and stuck in the twisted metal and glass. His struggles to free himself were frantic and animalistic. Red and blue lights painted the landscape in alternating waves of color as police sirens wailed in the distance. Sarah waved frantically at the approaching officers, tears streaming down her face as relief flooded through her body. The man continued thrashing in the windshield like an insect caught in a web, his inhuman sounds echoing across the empty highway. The officers drew their weapons, shouting commands that the man seemed incapable of understanding. When they finally extracted him from the wreckage, he attempted to bite one of the officers, foam specking his lips as he snapped his teeth like a rabid animal. They restrained him with difficulty, his body writhing with unnatural strength. At the police station, Sarah learned the truth that would haunt her dreams for years to come. The man was severely mentally ill, declared unfit for trial, and committed to a state institution. There would be no justice in the traditional sense, no punishment that matched the terror he had inflicted. The system had failed to contain a dangerous individual, and Sarah had paid the price. Her parents arranged for a flight home from the nearest airport, but the damage was done. The memory of that face in the window, twisted with malevolent joy, would follow her into sleep for months. Every unexpected sound, every shadow at her window would bring back the taste of that fear. The man remained institutionalized, locked away from society, but not from Sarah's nightmares. She often wondered how many others had encountered him on dark highways, and whether they had been as fortunate as she. The thought that he might someday be released, might once again hunt lone travelers on empty roads, was a weight she carried like a stone in her chest. Years later, Sarah still avoided night driving whenever possible. When she had no choice, she carried protection and never traveled alone. The highway where it happened remained on her mental map as a place of darkness, a stretch of road where evil had shown its face and reminded her how fragile the boundary between safety and nightmare truly was. The scars on her psyche had faded but never disappeared, a permanent reminder that monsters are real, and they hunt in the spaces between civilization's lights. Story 2. The notification chimed on Emma's phone like a digital siren call, announcing another match on the dating app that had become her nightly ritual. His profile picture showed a man with dark hair and kind eyes, someone who looked like he might actually read the books he claimed to enjoy. After weeks of disappointing encounters with men who seemed more interested in conquests than conversation, Oliver appeared refreshingly different. Their text conversations flowed with an ease that surprised her. He asked thoughtful questions about her work as a graphic designer, shared stories about his travels that seemed genuine rather than boastful, and demonstrated a sense of humor that wasn't built on cruel observations about others. When he suggested dinner instead of her usual first-date coffee, Emma found herself agreeing despite her better judgment. Her friend's warnings echoed in her mind as she gave him her address. Letting a stranger pick her up violated every online dating safety rule she had learned, but Oliver's messages radiated a sincerity that made her usual caution seem almost paranoid. He insisted on being a gentleman, on treating her with the respect she deserved. In a world of casual hookups and ghosting, his old-fashioned courtesy felt like a breath of fresh air. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock, punctual to the minute, as promised. Emma opened the door with anticipation dancing in her chest, only to have her excitement deflate like a punctured balloon. The man standing before her bore only a passing resemblance to his photographs. The same bone structure was there, but aged by what appeared to be a decade or more. Lines mapped his face like a road map of disappointment, and his hair had thinned considerably from the thick waves in his pictures. Emma's mother had raised her to be honest but kind, so she attempted a diplomatic approach when he awkwardly asked if he looked even better than his photos. Her gentle inquiry about when the pictures were taken clearly struck a nerve. Oliver's jaw tightened, his friendly demeanor shifting to something colder and more volatile. The silence that followed her question stretched uncomfortably as he focused on the road ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. The restaurant should have been a right turn at the intersection they were approaching. Emma knew the area well, having lived in the neighborhood for 3 years. She pointed out the missed turn cheerfully, assuming it was a simple mistake born of nervousness. But Oliver drove straight through the intersection without acknowledgement, his profile rigid and unresponsive to her repeated directions. Fear began its cold crawl up Emma's spine as they continued past the next intersection, then the next. Her suggestions became more urgent, her voice higher as panic crept in. Oliver remained silent, his eyes fixed forward like a man possessed by some internal fury. When Emma reached for the door handle at a red light, she discovered her trap. The locks were engaged with no manual override, the handles designed to retract completely into the door panels. The empty parking lot, where Oliver finally stopped, stretched before them like an arena prepared for violence. He chose a spot far from the store's entrance, shrouded in shadows cast by flickering streetlights. Emma's fingers found her purse as Oliver unbuckled his seatbelt, his intentions clear in the predatory way he turned toward her. The struggle was brief but vicious. Oliver grabbed her wrists, trying to pin her against the passenger seat, while she fought with the desperation of someone who understood exactly what was at stake. Her mother's self-defense classes, taken years ago and almost forgotten, suddenly returned with crystal clarity. When she managed to free one hand, the pepper spray appeared as if by magic. The confined space of the car became a chemical warfare zone. The spray that saved Emma also poisoned her, burning her eyes and throat as Oliver screamed beside her. Through tears and pain, she managed to reach across his writhing form and unlock the doors. The parking lot asphalt scraped her knees as she tumbled out, but freedom was worth any price. Oliver's pursuit was clumsy, his vision as compromised as hers by the pepper spray's effects. He called after her with a voice that alternated between rage and a twisted attempt at reconciliation, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that he was just joking. The absurdity of his explanation would have been laughable if it weren't so terrifying. The grocery store's automatic doors opened like the gates of sanctuary. The man who came to her aid was a middle-aged father who understood immediately that he was witnessing an attack, not a lover's quarrel. Oliver fled rather than face confrontation, disappearing into the night like the coward he truly was. The police investigation that followed was thorough but ultimately fruitless. Oliver had used a fake name on the dating app, a burner phone number, and had been careful to leave no digital trail that could lead back to his real identity. He had clearly done this before, refined his methods through practice on other unsuspecting women. Emma moved back in with her parents, unable to shake the paranoia that Oliver might return to finish what he started. Every knock at the door, every unknown number calling her phone, sent her heart racing with the fear that her nightmare wasn't over. The dating app was deleted, her trust in online connections shattered, perhaps permanently. Story 3. The late afternoon sun hung low in the winter sky as Rebecca loaded her 5-year-old daughter into their sedan, preparing for what should have been a routine drive to her in-laws' house. The plan was simple. She would arrive first with little Sophie, and her husband would follow after finishing his work shift. It was a journey they had made countless times before, a familiar route through back roads that offered scenic views and lighter traffic than the main highways. By 4:30, darkness had claimed the landscape completely, transforming the rural road into a tunnel of blackness pierced only by her headlight beams. The absence of streetlights made the isolation feel absolute, as if they were the last two people in a world that had forgotten them. Rebecca's hands tightened on the steering wheel as she navigated curves she knew by memory, her daughter sleeping peacefully in the back seat. The flashing yellow lights appeared in the distance like fireflies caught in amber, blinking with mechanical persistence in the road ahead. As Rebecca drew closer, she recognized them as hazard lights on a vehicle stopped, not on the shoulder where it belonged, but deliberately positioned in the center of the narrow road. Every maternal instinct screamed danger as she brought her car to a stop roughly 100 feet away, her mind racing through options while her heart hammered against her ribs. The thought of stopping to help never seriously crossed her mind. A woman alone with a child had no business approaching strangers on a deserted road at night, regardless of their apparent distress. She would call for help once she reached an area with cell service, but her first priority had to be protecting Sophie. Minutes stretched like hours as Rebecca sat frozen with indecision. The road was too narrow for a simple three-point turn, and backing up would be treacherous on the winding route. As she wrestled with her choices, movement in her rearview mirror caught her attention. Dark shapes were approaching from behind, moving with purposeful stealth through the moonlit landscape. The figures resolved into people as they drew closer, their intentions unclear, but their coordinated approach undeniably threatening. Rebecca's body reacted before her mind could fully process the danger. Her foot found the accelerator, and the car surged forward toward the blocking vehicle with desperate momentum. The ambush revealed itself as she approached. More figures emerged from the roadside, like demons materializing from shadow, their hands filled with rocks and bottles intended to force her stop. Rebecca swerved onto the shoulder, scraping past the stopped car as projectiles hammered her windshield and side panels. The safety glass, spider-webbed but held, though fragments scattered across the dashboard like deadly confetti. One of the attackers appeared directly in her path, and Rebecca felt the sickening impact as her bumper caught him. The man spun away into the darkness, whether seriously injured or merely knocked aside, she couldn't tell. Guilt warred with survival instinct as she pressed harder on the accelerator, putting distance between her family and the predators who had tried to claim them. Sophie's screams from the back seat tore at Rebecca's heart more than any physical injury could have. The child's world had been shattered by violence she couldn't understand, by the terrifying sight of her mother's panic and the sound of objects striking their car. Rebecca forced calm into her voice as she assured Sophie that everything would be okay, though she wasn't certain she believed it herself. The gated community where her in-laws lived had never looked more welcoming than it did that night. The guard recognized the distress in Rebecca's voice immediately and summoned her father-in-law to meet them at the entrance. The older man emerged from his house armed and ready, his military bearing evident even in civilian clothes. Inside the safety of the house, Rebecca's story spilled out between sobs while Sophie clung to her grandmother. The security cameras revealed a chilling epilogue to their escape, the same dark sedan circling the neighborhood repeatedly, its occupants apparently searching for their escaped prey. The police, contacted immediately, explained their limitations. The incident had occurred outside their jurisdiction, and without an active emergency, their response would be delayed. Rebecca's father-in-law made his position clear to both the police and any potential intruders. His property was well defended, and he would not hesitate to use lethal force against anyone who threatened his family. The cameras captured the final confrontation as two men approached the gate on foot, testing its strength and probing for weaknesses. The crack of a warning shot fired into the air sent them scrambling back to their vehicle, which disappeared into the night. The local news confirmed what Rebecca had suspected. Her family had encountered a carjacking crew that had been terrorizing the area for weeks. Several other drivers had been victimized, though most had not been fortunate enough to escape unharmed. The criminals remained at large, their identities unknown and their methods refined through practice. Recovery came slowly for both Rebecca and Sophie. The child's nightmares gradually faded, but Rebecca found herself changed in fundamental ways. She no longer traveled alone at night, and when circumstances demanded it, she went armed and alert. The innocence of assuming safety in familiar places had been stripped away, replaced by a hard-earned wisdom about the predators who hunt in the spaces between civilization's light. The back road where the attack occurred remained on Rebecca's mental map as a place of darkness, a reminder that evil exists in the world and sometimes wears the mask of someone needing help. Story 4. The construction site had claimed nearly 40 hours of David's life in an unforgiving marathon of labor and overtime pay. Management pushed their crews to the breaking point when deadlines loomed, and exhausted workers accepted the punishment because the money made their sacrifice worthwhile. As David finally left the worksite at 3 a.m, his body ached from physical exertion, while his mind buzzed with the strange hyper-awareness that comes from extreme fatigue. The roads were empty at this hour, transformed into arteries of solitude that connected sleeping neighborhoods across the city. David knew he was too tired to drive safely, but the alternative of sleeping in his truck seemed worse than the risk of nodding off behind the wheel. Home was only 20 minutes away, and his bed called to him like a siren song that made rational thought difficult. The child appeared in his headlight beams like a ghost materialized from the darkness. A young girl, perhaps 7 years old, sat alone on the roadside gravel with her knees drawn up to her chest. David's first instinct was to continue driving, to assume his exhausted eyes were playing tricks on him. But conscience overrode caution, and he pulled over to investigate. The girl looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too old for her face, but she offered no words when he asked about her situation. Her silence felt heavy with secrets, though whether from trauma or something else entirely, David couldn't determine. Against every safety protocol he had learned about dealing with unknown children, he opened his car door and invited her inside. She followed without hesitation, settling into his passenger seat as if she belonged there. David's plan was simple: drive to the nearest police station and let trained professionals handle the situation. Someone was surely searching for this lost child, and reuniting her with her family was the only responsible course of action. He tried repeatedly to engage her in conversation, hoping to learn her name or gather any information that might help identify her. But she remained silent, her gaze fixed on his face with unsettling intensity. 10 minutes down the road, another child appeared in the same impossible circumstance. A boy, slightly younger than the girl, sat alone in the darkness with the same eerie composure. David's rational mind rebelled against what he was seeing, but his conscience left him no choice. The boy joined them without explanation, taking a seat behind David and maintaining the same unnerving silence as his companion. The pattern repeated itself 15 minutes later, with a discovery that challenged David's grip on reality entirely. A car seat sat abandoned on the roadside, and inside was an infant who gazed up at him with alert eyes that seemed to catalogue his every movement. The impossibility of the situation warred with his protective instincts as he carefully lifted the carrier and placed it in his back seat. 3 children found in identical circumstances defied explanation. David's exhausted mind struggled to construct a narrative that made sense. Had they been abandoned by traffickers? Were they escapees from some horrible situation? The questions multiplied faster than answers as he drove toward the hospital where he had arranged to meet police officers. The emergency room receptionist's confused expression was David's first indication that something was fundamentally wrong with his perception of events. She looked at him with the careful attention medical professionals reserve for potentially dangerous individuals, her eyes scanning the space around him as if searching for something invisible. When David motioned toward the children, her confusion deepened into concern. The conversation that followed felt like stepping into an alternate reality. The receptionist insisted she saw no children, no car seat, no evidence of the passengers David was certain had accompanied him. The police officers who arrived moments later confirmed her assessment with gentle but firm authority. David was alone, they explained, carrying only a tool bag from his construction work. The diagnosis came after 72 hours of observation and testing in the psychiatric ward. Severe sleep deprivation could indeed cause hallucinations, but David's visions persisted even after he had rested. Further examination revealed the true culprit, a small but malignant tumor pressing against his optic nerve, creating false visual stimuli that his brain interpreted as real children. The hallucinations became his constant companions during the weeks of treatment that followed. The phantom children watched him sleep, sat with him during meals, and provided silent company that was both comforting and deeply disturbing. They felt real in every way that mattered, their presence more vivid than many actual memories. Chemotherapy and radiation gradually diminished their appearances until the children visited only occasionally, like old friends dropping by unexpectedly. David found himself missing them during their absences, though he understood their disappearance marked his recovery's progress. The irony was not lost on him that hallucinations born from a potentially fatal brain tumor had saved his life. Without that night drive and the impossible children he had tried to rescue, the cancer would have remained undetected until it was too advanced for treatment. The phantom passengers who had seemed like a curse were actually a strange form of salvation. Recovery remained uncertain, with no guarantees about his long-term prognosis. But David chose hope over despair, clinging to the possibility that early detection would prove to be his salvation. The children who had led him to medical intervention had given him something precious, time to fight for his life. Story 5. The storm that swept across the city that night carried the fury of nature unleashed, turning familiar streets into treacherous rivers and comfortable neighborhoods into disaster zones. Marcus had made the calculation that seemed reasonable at the time. His girlfriend's apartment was only 10 minutes from his house, and despite the weather warnings, the drive should have been manageable. He needed his work clothes for an early shift, and staying overnight would have meant facing his boss unprepared. The power grid had surrendered to the storm hours earlier, plunging the city into primitive darkness broken only by the occasional emergency vehicle or the pale glow of cell phone screens. Marcus navigated by instinct and memory. Following routes he could drive blindfolded under normal circumstances. The rain hammered his windshield with such intensity that his wipers became useless, creating a liquid curtain that made visibility nearly impossible. The turn onto his street felt different immediately. His truck moved with a strange, floating sensation, as if the solid ground beneath had become treacherous and unreliable. Water seeped through the door seals, initially just dampness on his feet that quickly became something much more alarming. Through his headlight beams, he watched the flood level rising with terrifying speed. The current grabbed his truck like an invisible hand, pulling him away from the familiar landmarks of his neighborhood and into a watery maze, where street signs disappeared beneath the surface. The engine died with a final sputter of protest, leaving Marcus in darkness broken only by his waterproof flashlight. The water climbed past his knees, then his waist, transforming his vehicle into a slowly sinking tomb. Emergency services, overwhelmed by citywide flooding, offered little comfort when Marcus finally connected with a dispatcher. He was not their only crisis that night, they explained with clinical detachment. Help would arrive within 30 minutes, though they warned that timeline was optimistic given the scope of the disaster. Marcus felt his hope sink along with his truck as water reached his chest. The messages he recorded on his phone were meant as final communications with family members he might never see again. Speaking to his parents and siblings through the voice recorder felt surreal, like delivering his own eulogy while still drawing breath. The therapeutic effect surprised him. Confronting mortality somehow made the immediate danger feel more manageable. Prayer came naturally to Marcus as the water reached his neck, forcing him to press his face against the truck's ceiling to maintain an airway. Religious faith that had been dormant for years suddenly blazed to life with the intensity of a man facing eternity. The conversation with God felt as real as any human dialogue, a desperate negotiation for more time in exchange for promises of better living. The sound of an approaching engine cut through the storm's chaos, like a choir of angels announcing salvation. Marcus pressed his face against the small air pocket remaining in his truck's cabin, using his flashlight to signal desperately toward the sound. The rescue boat appeared in his beam like a vessel from heaven, its occupants prepared for exactly the emergency that had trapped him. The window breaker shattered his driver's side glass on the first impact, sending a shower of safety glass fragments into the murky water. Strong hands grabbed his shirt and pulled him through the opening just as his air pocket disappeared completely. The transition from drowning to breathing felt like resurrection. Each gulp of storm-soaked air, a gift he had not expected to receive. The rescue boat collected other stranded motorists before heading to higher ground where emergency services waited. Marcus learned that his saviors were not professional rescuers, but ordinary citizens who had recognized the need and responded with boats and courage. Their heroism in the face of dangerous conditions spoke to the best of human nature. When crisis stripped away pretense and revealed character, the flood claimed no lives that night, though Marcus knew he had come within minutes of becoming its first victim. The experience left him changed in ways both obvious and subtle. Deep water triggered anxiety attacks for months afterward, and storm clouds brought back the taste of panic he had experienced while trapped. Therapy helped, but complete recovery seemed as elusive as the solid ground he had lost that night. Marcus developed a profound respect for the volunteers who had saved his life, men and women who had risked their own safety to help strangers in crisis. Their example inspired him to examine his own willingness to help others, leading to volunteer work with local emergency response teams. If he could pay forward even a fraction of what he had received that night, the trauma might gain meaning beyond mere survival. The storm had taken his truck and his sense of security, but it had also given him perspective on what truly mattered. Every day since felt like borrowed time, an opportunity to live with gratitude rather than entitlement. The water that had nearly claimed his life had also washed away assumptions about his own immortality, leaving behind a clearer understanding of how precious and fragile life truly was. Story 6. The dirt road stretched ahead of them like a pathway into adventure, disappearing into forests that promised the solitude and natural beauty that Jake and Jessica craved. Their spontaneous decision to spend a week camping reflected their shared philosophy of embracing life's opportunities without overthinking the details. Both worked freelance schedules that allowed for impulsive escapes, and the state park offered free camping for up to 14 days without permits or reservations. Jake's mistake was born from overconfidence and inexperience with night driving on unpaved roads. The high beams he forgot to activate would have revealed the fallen tree that blocked their path, giving him precious seconds to react instead of the split-second glimpse that preceded their collision. Speed compounded the error, his foot too heavy on the accelerator for terrain that demanded caution and respect. The crash hurled Jake into unconsciousness for several critical minutes. He awakened to ringing ears and a throbbing head, but his first concern was for Jessica, who remained motionless beside him. The moonlight illuminated her face enough to show closed eyes and an alarming stillness that sent panic racing through his bloodstream. Her white shirt bore dark stains that his flashlight revealed to be blood, though the source remained hidden until he saw the branch. The tree limb had punched through their windshield like a spear thrown by an angry forest god. Its diameter matched that of a human finger, but its placement was devastatingly precise, entering Jessica's chest at an angle that suggested potential heart damage. The branch remained connected to the fallen tree, creating a grotesque tether that bound Jessica to the instrument of her injury. Jake's attempts to wake Jessica were gentle but desperate, his voice calling her name with increasing urgency as minutes passed without response. He avoided touching her, afraid that movement might cause additional trauma to organs already damaged by the intrusion. His phone showed no signal bars, cutting off their connection to emergency services and leaving them isolated in the wilderness. The knife in Jake's pocket was designed for camping tasks, not emergency surgery. His attempts to cut through the branch proved futile, the small blade making minimal progress against wood that seemed determined to maintain its grip on Jessica. 30 minutes of sawing produced only shallow scratches and growing desperation as Jessica remained unconscious. Prayer felt foreign to Jake, who had abandoned religious practices years earlier in favor of rational thinking and self-reliance. But extremity has a way of reducing complex worldviews to simple pleas for help from any available source. His bargaining with God reflected the desperation of a man, watching someone he loved slip away while he remained powerless to help. The approaching headlights appeared like a miracle made manifest, cutting through the darkness with the promise of rescue. The driver who stopped was a local man familiar with the mountain roads and equipped with tools that Jake's camping gear couldn't match. His chainsaw would provide the power needed to free Jessica, though the vibration risk to her injured body created new dangers. The cutting process felt like an eternity compressed into minutes. Jake covered Jessica with a blanket to protect the wound from sawdust, watching helplessly as the saw's vibration shook her unconscious form. The moment of separation was both relief and terror. Freedom from the tree balanced against uncertainty about what damage had been done. The EMT station represented civilization's outpost in the wilderness, staffed by professionals who understood that mountain emergencies often came to them rather than the reverse. The ambulance ride to the local hospital began Jessica's journey through a medical system that would dominate their lives for months to come. The helicopter that airlifted Jessica to the trauma center in the city looked like something from a war zone, its medical equipment and urgent crew emphasizing the severity of her condition. Jake watched from the ground as the aircraft disappeared into the night sky, carrying his future wife and his hopes for their life together. Jessica's survival came with a price measured in months of hospitalization, multiple surgeries, and permanent changes to her respiratory system. The punctured lung healed imperfectly, leaving her dependent on supplemental oxygen and regular medical monitoring. Her 2-week coma had stolen memories of the accident, a mercy that spared her the trauma of remembering her own near-death experience. Jake's proposal came during one of Jessica's clearer moments in the hospital, born from the realization that life offers no guarantees about tomorrow. Her acceptance sealed their commitment to facing whatever challenges her recovery might bring, whether that meant complete healing or permanent disability. The accident's aftermath tested their relationship in ways that normal courtship never could. Medical appointments replaced date nights, and discussions of insurance coverage substituted for dreams of travel and adventure. Yet their bond deepened through shared adversity, proving that love could survive and even thrive when tested by genuine crisis. Jake carried guilt about the accident like a stone in his chest, believing that his driving decisions had stolen Jessica's health and changed their future forever. Her forgiveness came gradually, built through months of gentle reassurance that accidents happen despite the best intentions, and that their love was stronger than the sum of their mistakes. Story 7, 16-year-old Tyler embodied every stereotype of teenage rebellion that night. His anger at his mother's restrictions, blinding him to the wisdom born from her life experience. The car keys he had stolen earlier represented freedom from parental control, though he lacked the maturity to understand that rules often exist to protect rather than restrict. The argument with his mother had followed a familiar script of adolescent demands meeting parental boundaries. Tyler's friends were an hour away in the city, but distance seemed like a small obstacle to someone drunk on the invincibility that youth provides. His mother's concerns about drinking and driving felt like ancient paranoia rather than reasonable caution, based on statistical reality. Southern California's traffic patterns made Tyler's journey longer than anticipated, leading him to abandon main roads for side streets that he hoped would provide shortcuts. The unfamiliar neighborhoods he entered represented the kind of urban landscape that suburban teenagers rarely encounter. Areas where poverty and desperation create different rules for survival. Getting lost in such territory was dangerous for anyone, but particularly for a young man whose expensive clothes and clean appearance marked him as an outsider with resources worth taking. Tyler's attempts to navigate back to familiar ground led him deeper into a maze of narrow streets, where his presence would not go unnoticed by those who made their living preying on the vulnerable. The truck blocking the road was positioned too deliberately to be coincidence. Its sideways orientation creating a barrier that forced Tyler to stop or risk damage to his mother's car. The man with the gun appeared as if materialized from shadow, his weapon pointed directly at Tyler's face through the driver's side window. The beating that followed was methodical and educational, designed to teach lessons about respect and territory rather than simply cause damage. Multiple attackers took turns demonstrating their power over someone who had stumbled into their domain uninvited. Tyler's pleas for mercy were ignored as irrelevant. The photographs they took of Tyler's battered form served multiple purposes: trophies of their dominance, proof of their willingness to use violence, and warning material for others who might consider challenging their authority. The casual nature of their documentation spoke to the routine brutality that characterized their world. The theft of Tyler's possessions was almost secondary to the lesson they were teaching. His car, wallet, and phone represented material gains. His suffering became their entertainment, and his humiliation their victory. Tyler's survival was due more to luck than mercy. The attackers apparently believed they had achieved their goals without needing to commit murder, though the severity of his injuries suggested they had come close to crossing that line. The discovery of severed Achilles tendons added an element of calculated cruelty that spoke to experience with inflicting precisely targeted damage. The paramedics who found him hours later marveled at his survival, noting that blood loss from his multiple injuries could easily have been fatal. Someone had called for emergency services, though Tyler never learned whether it was a good Samaritan or the attackers themselves disposing of evidence. His rescue felt miraculous, given the isolation of his location. Tyler's month-long hospitalization provided time for reflection on the choices that had led to his near-death experience. The broken ribs, facial fractures, and surgical repairs to his ankles were constant reminders of how quickly arrogance could transform into vulnerability. Physical therapy would be required for years, with no guarantee of complete recovery. The police investigation confirmed what Tyler had suspected. He had encountered gang members conducting an initiation ritual that required violence against innocent victims. His attackers were never identified, disappearing back into neighborhoods where cooperation with law enforcement was seen as betrayal of community solidarity. Tyler's relationship with his mother transformed through his trauma, their previous conflicts seeming petty compared to the reality of what could happen when teenage rebellion met urban violence, now appeared as expressions of love designed to protect him from dangers he had been too inexperienced to recognize. The incident served as a harsh education in the realities beyond suburban comfort zones. Tyler learned that privilege could not protect him from violence, that good intentions meant nothing to those who viewed him as an enemy based solely on his appearance and location. The lesson came at a price measured in pain and permanent disability. His recovery became a family project that strengthened bonds previously strained by adolescent resistance to authority. Tyler's newfound appreciation for his parents' wisdom grew from understanding that their life experience had value beyond his teenage comprehension. The boy who had hated parental rules became a young man grateful for their protection. Story 8. Sarah's decision to relocate across state lines with her teenage daughters represented a new beginning after months of legal warfare over custody rights. The divorce had been brutal, made worse by her ex-husband's drug problems and financial instability, but the court's decision to award her full custody felt like vindication of her choices. The move would distance them from toxic family dynamics and give her girls a chance to heal from trauma they had witnessed during their parents' deteriorating marriage. The logistics of relocation had been carefully planned over weeks of preparation. Moving trucks would follow in a few days. But Sarah wanted to arrive early with 14-year-old Emma and 16-year-old Grace to begin settling into their new home. The girls were excited about the adventure, treating the journey like an extended road trip rather than a permanent escape from painful memories. Their route followed major highways for most of the journey, but as evening approached, they found themselves in rural territory where hotels were scarce and competition for rooms was fierce. A massive youth soccer tournament had consumed every available accommodation within a 100-mile radius, leaving traveling families like theirs without options for comfortable overnight stays. The rest stop where they finally parked for the night seemed safe enough initially. Other families occupied nearby spaces, and the well-lit facilities suggested regular maintenance and security attention. Sarah had made similar stops during previous road trips without incident, and exhaustion made the decision easier than it might have been under different circumstances. The motorcycle engines that woke her hours later carried a menacing rumble that spoke of powerful machines and dangerous riders. Through her window, Sarah counted at least 25 bikers assembling in the parking area, their leather-clad forms moving with the casual arrogance of predators claiming territory. The same men from the gas station were among them, recognizable despite the darkness. Sarah's maternal instincts screamed warnings as she observed the group's behavior. Their crude comments about the hotties in the back seat revealed intentions that went far beyond casual interest in fellow travelers. These were not weekend enthusiasts enjoying recreational riding, but something far more threatening that viewed her daughters as potential prey. The escape attempt began as cautiously as possible, with Sarah hoping to drive away unnoticed, while the bikers were distracted by their own conversations. But luck abandoned her when her headlights automatically activated, drawing every eye in the parking lot directly to her vehicle. Recognition was immediate and unwelcome, confirming her worst fears about their interest in her family. The pursuit that followed transformed the highway into a battlefield, where Sarah's sedan faced overwhelming odds against a pack of motorcycles designed for speed and maneuverability. The bikers surrounded her vehicle like wolves, harassing wounded prey. Their aggressive riding meant to force her off the road and into their complete control. Grace's phone call to emergency services provided their only connection to help, though the response time would prove inadequate for their immediate crisis. The bikers' tactics escalated from intimidation to direct attack as they began throwing objects at her car and attempting to ram her off the roadway. Sarah's defensive driving skills, learned through necessity during her contentious divorce, became their primary defense against overwhelming aggression. The crash came when one biker succeeded in striking her rear quarter panel at precisely the right angle to send her vehicle spinning off the pavement. Sarah managed to avoid hitting trees directly, but the impact was severe enough to disable her car and leave them vulnerable to whatever the bikers planned next. The men surrounded their vehicle immediately, testing doors and windows while her daughters screamed in terror. Police sirens in the distance caused the attackers to abandon their prey and flee into the night, disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. The officers who responded were sympathetic but realistic about their chances of apprehending the criminals. Motorcycle groups that engaged in such coordinated attacks were typically experienced in avoiding law enforcement and had likely scattered across multiple jurisdictions. The investigation that followed confirmed Sarah's suspicions about the nature of their attackers. Similar incidents had been reported throughout the region, always targeting families with young women and always following the same pattern of intimidation escalating to violence. The criminal organization behind the attacks remained active and dangerous, hunting for vulnerable victims along major travel routes. Recovery for Sarah's family involved more than physical healing from the crash injuries they had sustained. Both daughters required counseling to process the trauma of being hunted by predators who had viewed them as objects rather than human beings. The violation of their security during what should have been an exciting family adventure left lasting scars on their ability to trust the world around them. Sarah's new home became a fortress where security systems and firearms training replaced the naive assumption that distance would provide safety from dangerous people. Her ex-husband's threats paled in comparison to the random violence they had encountered from strangers who had targeted them solely because they appeared vulnerable. The motorcycle pack was never apprehended, remaining free to hunt other families on dark highways where law enforcement presence was minimal and escape routes were plentiful. Sarah often wondered how many other mothers had faced similar ordeals, and whether they had been as fortunate as her family in surviving the encounter with predators who operated beyond society's protective reach. The world contained genuine evil that wore many faces, and protection required constant vigilance rather than hopeful assumptions about human nature. The lesson had come at a terrible price, but it had also prepared them to recognize danger and respond appropriately. When confronted by those who viewed others as prey rather than fellow human beings, a reminder that predators hunt in the spaces between civilization's lights, waiting for families who believe that distance and darkness will protect them from the monsters that share their world.